Make yourself comfortable. Hello, everyone's doing great? Yes, that's nice. As you know, we speak about compliance today, and it's such a interesting and such a complex topic with different kind of perspectives. So I would like to start this conversation very, very slowly and start with a question: what kind of cross-border moves do you handle at your company? And maybe, Jaya, you can kick this off if you would like to.
Works? Hello. Yes. Good. So what cross-border moves do we, cross-border mostly, right? Of course, I begin more with the volume. So of course we have relocations, working from abroad, business travels, especially in the EU context where there's posted worker directives to be applied, followed by EU commuters, which is quite a developing topic. Yeah.
It's kind of a funny question for me. I don't actually know.
You don't know. Why you don't know?
So I work for Octopus. They're a green energy tech company. They're about 10,000 people. We're in roughly 15 countries, and I'm not aware of the majority of the stuff that goes on because I don't support on a lot of it. And so a lot of it happens at a local level. But in the past year, I've supported on probably like a dozen or so international relocations and probably about 40 visas or something like that.
Yeah, right. Nice. Matthias, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so cross-border moves. So I'm talent leader in my organization, and of course for us it's very important to understand what kind of talent do we get from which markets. We are set up in a way that we are serving the Latin American market, the US market, and the European market, and with the support of AORs, we are actually technically possible to hire around the world. But of course, due to cost reasons, we also try to optimize the OPEX and try to figure out how we can, be more mindful on hiring the right talents in the right countries.
Okay, Julia, what's your point?
Also interesting question for me because we're still super small. We only have 11 employees, so there go a lot on workations and business trips, not yet assignments, working on that. But we are a provider of remote work software, so we do handle a lot of workations, business trips, and so on via the platform.
All right, thank you for that. I find it so interesting also on the group discussions that everyone has a different opinion about what is compliant, what is global mobility. And so the next question is a little bit about the admin around these moves, right? Because we all know that every company has a different approach on handling global mobility requests. And Rob, we spoke before, and you at Octopus Energy, you have a very interesting philosophy, right? We call it the Netflix approach. Around rules and compliance. Maybe you can explain a little bit what that is and how you handle it.
Jaya and I have been already having some intense discussions about this. So we're about a business of sort of 10,000 people, we're up to 15 different countries. We've grown very quickly since, I think, 2015, 2016. We're now the second biggest energy company in the UK. And we're across Europe. We've got doing quite well in Germany, if you're interested in becoming a customer. And we operate in America, in Australia, New Zealand. And one of the things that we take a sort of Netflix approach is that we don't have much in the way of policies and procedures. And we take this one step further than Netflix, that we don't really have a HR team. I know that seems a bit contradictory. My job title is a people ops lead. But for a business of sort of roughly 10,000 people, we probably have 12, 15 HR people, which isn't very much. And what we think is that we want to make a big green dent in the universe. That's what we talk about. Save the planet, make energy a lot greener, and we don't want to create rules to stop people from doing that. And so we want to remove the rules. We want to create an environment where it's very innovative, very creative, very dynamic, very fast moving. And we want to give people a lot of trust in order to work out what they think, do what they think is the right thing to do in that situation. And so it's very manager-led, so there's a lot of manager discretion. And what that means for the admin is that I'm not a global mobility professional by background. I kind of just happened to be doing this about a year ago. And so I'm trying to get the right tools for people to get the compliance piece right, to get the relocation piece right, because obviously, if we're sending people abroad to far-flung corners of the world, we want to make sure that we're getting the compliance bit right. We're getting we're supporting them finding a house, finding somewhere to live. But it's not me who's pushing that forward. It's not me who's managing that situation. It's down to the manager to work out whether they need to. They'll talk to the immigration provider. There's a platform they can get some immigration assessment and an in-person conversation if they need to, and they can work out what their relocation needs are, and then the manager can sign that off themselves without having to go through me. And so in some ways, the ideal scenario is where I just don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on because it's just happening, and that's great. If there's a problem, which there often is, but in part because we're just kind of setting these things up and iterating and kind of seeing how it goes. But I anticipate in a few months' time it will be running a lot more smoothly. Then I really won't know what's going on. Yeah.
Very interesting. Jaya, I can imagine you run the same for Zalando, or it looks a little bit different.
Yeah. Well, at Zalando we are getting better, let's say. So of course at Zalando we've had mainly relocations as the main need over the last year. So of course the team does a great job here. We are engaged with quite a few vendors to support our employees with their immigration, with more like a framework or guideline document, not necessarily a policy. But also I'm learning with the younger organizations or scale-up organizations, it's much is not expected that there's very strict policy ways to follow. I mean, as also my colleague here mentions, that there's a little bit of flexibility. So of course, Zalando also does believe in flexibility, but not without comprising on compliance, right? So, yeah, we are taking a more pragmatic approach to be compliant, to see where we need to bring in tools to get the right support for our employees, have high-level guidelines or frameworks designed.
Yeah, I find that very interesting because when I've heard that from Rob, I thought, okay, that's a very small company. They can do that. But then I heard they have 10,000 plus employees, and I was like, that's very interesting and not what I usually hear during my conversation with big enterprise clients on a weekly basis. So Matthias, Julia, be invited. What are your thoughts on this and how, Matthias, you're smiling. What's going on in your head?
Yes, we are a small company, and we don't do it like this. I get the idea from Netflix and their approach, right? Don't get me wrong. But the smaller companies that I've been in, leadership is always a problem, meaning we have not so mature leaders, and giving them full control and power to do whatever is a risk issue. I think we have seen in my company that things like, so we have a global workforce, right? Even if we are small, but that means even leaders that are used to work in this country, let's say the US, for example, and they're letting people go and don't do this correctly, and then you have 200,000 euro or US dollars in fees, legal fees. Well, good luck. That's not scalable, or it's not. There's no attempt to scale this because that's very cost heavy. So what we see is a little bit. We are trying to guide, advise people. Yeah. So talent is advising. Our people leadership is advising to make the best decisions. We are also small enough to actually still have conversations with people. Right. It's not too big to scale to say, oh, I will never see this leader, right? But yeah, we're trying to advise and trying to help decision makers in our companies to be mindful of what are the steps and what kind of consequences every decision has, and then we'll decide together.
Thank you. Julia?
Yeah, I was laughing because you could see everybody get nervous, like whipping, like with the foot and everything while you were talking. But I think you can still be compliant and flexible. In terms of the Netflix approach, I feel like it's almost a little unfair to the leaders because they simply don't know what to check. Because this is such a complex topic, you have so many legal areas or areas of law that not even a lawyer would probably be able to answer all of these questions. And also to underline what you said, I think it might just be a question of tools, because of tools and experts, either or both, to just give this flexibility to the people, but keep everything on track through a tool or through a good global mobility department. So people can still be flexible, but stay compliant.
I know I'm sort of a bit of an outlier here, and I'm in a room with lots of HR professionals, and I'm talking about how my company doesn't really have a HR team. So I appreciate that represents a somewhat existential threat to your career. As it does my own, but I think there is an argument to be made that sort of 80% of cases are relatively straightforward, and that that they can be managed. People can get the advice, they can understand the advice. It's not so complex, and that the relocation and the immigration stuff is relatively routine. Like we send a lot of people to France, for instance. That's a relatively straightforward thing for going from Britain to France, arranging the visa, arranging the relocation. We've got an office in France already, so people understand the process. But then certainly in the 20% where it's more complex, or it's a new market, or there are some complexities that we're not aware of, then certainly that's the kind of situation that I'd get involved in.
I think to that I just want to add, I think we are all learning because the situation with each organization is different. What is the gravitational pull of these requirements? How many number of cases is the company actually dealing with? How widespread are the operations, and how those operations are dealt with? So I think there's a lot of points there to consider, also with senior leadership, but of course to also bring in the right expert in the room to say, okay, how do we navigate this? Do we take some risks in the short term, but in the long term we plan that we will be more compliant? Or are we just like super flexible and we'll just live with the risk? So I think it's somewhere each organization has to find its right rhythm, but also, of course, get informed.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I think it can also develop in an organization, right? You can start somewhere today, and tomorrow, based on previous experiences or new legislation, you can change your point on these stakes, right? I would like to ask you something, Matthias, because based on some conversations we had, you deal with a lot of relocations, and in your point of view, what are the biggest compliance concerns you consider, and maybe how do you handle the workload at a scale?
Yeah, it was very funny when I started, they did not have any support. Yeah, so this means there was no inside, there was no knowledge in the current existing people team back then. So we needed to get external support. Yeah, so we didn't decide to hire somebody internally, but really get relocation partners, setups, et cetera, et cetera. And then really the risks I see is that I think the organization, because they haven't really relocated or did not have so much, let's say, experience with global talents. Yeah, it was very organically grown from one hub into another, and it was more German-based or hub-based kind of growth. That they did not have the awareness, right? So you create a lot very fast awareness by starting to relocate without relocation packages and wonder why people need working visas, or why people need a home, or or budget or authorities. So the organization kept on learning very fast from those experiences, and in the end what we can see is that if you have access to a global talent pool, and I think this is what we have experienced also in the pandemic, right? We suddenly could hire everywhere, yeah? And this is golden for every talent acquisition leader, but at the same time a nightmare for everyone on the other side, yeah, so the HR team. And so here it's really about creating a great experience for talents to make such a shift, because in my experience, most of the time, 80–90%, they underestimate the move into a different country. They are not aware of the bureaucracy that they face, especially, I don't know if you still remember the pandemic, but like when you wanted to get something from the legal authorities, there was a nightmare, yeah? I remember I was moving into a different organization and I needed a background check, which is very common in the UK. But in Germany, it took me 6 months. And literally when I handed it into the UK, they were like, dude, actually we would have never hired you to begin with. And literally because in Germany your authorities are not working, we have an issue here. So I think it's really about giving transparency, creating commitment, creating a good experience in order to get great talent in, yeah, and to leverage also the opportunities ahead of us, right? I think we also don't need to forget when you have existing teams, they have payrolls, they earn certain money, and by hiring new people in that just get with a higher salary, getting better compensated, because we don't know what we are doing in the different countries and markets, it's such a high risk to literally have an effect in the existing systems and the team dynamics, yeah.
Yeah, fair point. I would like to ask you something, Julia, and you have a very unique position, right? You explained a little bit what Rome is doing. You speak to many companies. It's about compliance, as we all know. Are there any trends you're seeing in short-term moves like workations, business trips? And do you think companies are not taking those risks because of compliance?
I was just at the Zukunft Personal, which some people might know, a couple of weeks ago, and then there was the most asked question. I have kind of giving speeches, and I was asking the community, are you already allowing workations or not? And most of the time, like 70% of the hands went up, this is new. Like last year, people didn't even know what a workation is, so this changed in 1 year only. And then still, they were there, like hearing us talk about compliance. And then afterwards, I heard a lot of HR people coming to me and saying, look, I know we have a risk here, but my managing directors, they're just letting it go freely. And this is super interesting for me because it's not their problem, right? It's not an HR problem, it's a managing director's problem if you're not compliant. So this is a new trend that I'm experiencing, which is interesting. And then I can also see people that have successfully developed workation tools and policies and whatever, they're now moving towards a more global approach. So we have discussed this before also at the table. People want to broaden the policy, want to go to more countries and want to go to their home countries and so on. So this is also something we see. And the biggest trend that I also experience is self-introduced assignments, kind of. Not sure if that's the right word or term for it, but people that kind of actively want to go abroad. It's not the typical you have to go to China for 3 years assignment contracts anymore, but it's the person who actually wants to move to a different office and stay there for a couple of months. And this is kind of very new to me as well, but I really like it because when I started my career in Allianz or Mercedes, I would have loved to do that. Like everybody, we wouldn't even dare to ask something like this. And the fact that people are now able to do this is really cool.
On the first point, what you mentioned with the managing directors is not really taking care of the compliance part. Why do you think it's like this? Is it the educational part? Is it too early? Where are we on this journey?
They all read the book, the Netflix book. I think that might be the problem. I think it's not quite clear what is the risk, what is the cost that could be that they could be opposed to, and also what would it cost to be compliant. It's just such a cloudy topic, this whole compliance thing, that people would just rather just not look and have people just wait until something happens.
Yeah, that's interesting. I spoke to a client also this year, and they said, yeah, so far nothing big happened in Europe when it comes to fines, right? Let's see when something is happening.
And we also discussed this before, just at the table, because things are happening. It's just you cannot read about it on the paper, because no company would ever allow this to become public. So these things are happening. It's just not something that's very public.
Yeah, interesting.
And then maybe also one thing, if you think about how humans or how leaders learn, it's they have to experience this. They have to make the mistakes to then understand, oh, it's important, right? So I think this is what we learned. We made the mistakes, we paid our price, and suddenly there was a topic, yeah? But if nothing happens, then they'll be like, yeah, it's nice advice, but look, we made it so far, so why would we change, yeah?
Yeah, fair point. Matthias, because you just answered the last part of the question, I give you a new one. Because you also have a policy in place, you mentioned it a little bit about it. So it's more about the admin, the tracking and the controlling. How do you do that when talents spend time abroad, or how do you inform, or how they need to inform you as a company in advance? Can you give us a little bit more insights on that?
Yeah, so we have a remote work policy that actually allows everyone to work 45 days remote. And how does it work is that in the ideal case, yeah, so they talk to their manager, say, I would love to request to work, let's say the UK, yeah? And normally our people team has a global map where we have green, amber and red countries, yeah? And so the green countries are literally like, yeah, oh, you want to work there? Oh, fine, all good. Then the yellow, the amber ones, these are the countries where we look into this a little bit more specific. So there needs to be a proper check. And then the red countries, they are literally like off topic, yeah? So, but of course what we see is this would be the ideal state, right? But then suddenly somebody is just somewhere, the manager doesn't know, you'd be like, why do you don't know where your people are? Well, it seems to happen. And so, and that's then literally an issue. And it's not so much also about policies and what the people team wants, but it's also more of a security topic, yeah? So I do think that you know, there are certain countries where if you cannot or you don't have strong security systems to back this up, then this is also a potential risk, yeah. So especially if you have an engineer that works on the back end and so on, right? These are topics where we sometimes, or even with contractors or freelancers, completely different. Like this is just for full-time employees, but we need to be mindful there, right? Because I think this is a high risk for us.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I quickly ask a question? Because how are you dealing with, for example, there are red countries in terms of immigration, but if you are a national of this country, it might not be red. Is it still on the red list?
That's a good point. We had one point where we said, look, you can go there, but you cannot work there. So that means it's a kind of a sabbatical or unpaid leave, yeah? If it's something where you say, okay, but it's of family reasons or whatsoever, then you'd be like, yeah, but you know, the risk is too high, and they most of the time work from Berlin or in Germany or in the other European country where it's green or amber. And so, yeah, in these cases we had to do, we needed to be that tough, yeah.
Jaya, to you, does that happen at Zalando as well, that you don't know where some employees are working? Or what tooling are you using? How is your process?
No, it doesn't so happen that we don't know where employees are working. We have a work from abroad framework. Well, as you said, we don't use too much the word policy, but more a framework, something that guides, that has certain guidelines. And our framework allows up to 30 days. Of course, again, countries are determined based on the double tax treaties, if they exist, and certain few other factors that are internally checked by the team. However, we have a since this was more a developing topic, I think this was, the framework was brought in place more at the time of pandemic when this was really growing, employees were really working elsewhere, or, you know, this whole workation topic was really rising, and we don't like to call it workation, we more call it work from abroad, because it's a formal framework guideline that says you have up to 30 days, but each instance cannot be taken more than 10 days. So the intent here is to ensure that there is not continuous work. I think we also, of course, have a policy for business trips, and here the intent always is to be able to prove to the authorities that there is not ongoing work happening in that country, and also protecting the organization from permanent establishment risks. So that's how far we are able to control it. I mean, of course, there's not the best solution out there, of course. There are new tools that are out there which can offer a great solution. However, every company had to more apply something at this point, and this is exactly something we would look at reviewing, whether we develop, because it's always a request for more number of days. I think one of the session earlier, there was also a possibility of 71 days within the EU. So I think every organization more or less has to decide what is their employee mix. At Zalando, we have a very diverse workforce from different countries, and of course risks are something that we need to consider. Also IT security, because you might end up in that country, but then your laptop doesn't work. So IT security, safety security, with all the political and news situations going around.
Yeah, fair enough. Rob, also your stake on this. I mean, with 12 people, are you actually able to track something, or how do you do that?
We know where people are, but I guess it's a question of like who's responsible for that, and the kind of culture that we want is one where it's managers who are responsible for stuff, because it's managers who are the ones who are going to drive employee performance, drive employee engagement. I've worked in other businesses with more traditional HR teams, and in those ones, it's the head of HR or the chief people officer. They're responsible for attendance rates. They're responsible for performance reviews. They're responsible for how engaged are the team, and realistically, the person who's got the most amount of who affects those things the most is the manager. And so the person who should be responsible for workations, knowing where people are, holding them to account on that kind of stuff, should be the manager. We've got as well as talking about how we have no HR, we also talk about how we're all HR. And so there's the sense that everyone is kind of responsible for each other. Managers are essentially, they're the ones that are responsible for their teams above all else, and we're there to support them, but we're not going to take away their responsibility.
Okay, thank you for that. Jaya, maybe my next question is to you in terms of relocations. How do you educate leadership or even talent if they come to you? Because there will be some legal hoops you might need to jump through, right? Zalando wants to open a new hub somewhere, and senior leaders are very agile and very happy, and let's get some stuff there. Like, what's your approach there?
Yeah, this is a very key topic I manage on a day-to-day basis. So it's majority of my time really taken in with educating. We have at Zalando we have one of our principles is transparency. So due to transparency, we have an intranet portal, so any request kind of needs to be logged through this using the portal, and then it reaches the mobility team. The mobility team, of course, checks if that's something we can straight away, give an answer for, or it's something that we've not thought about before, or it's a first-time example. It's then brought into a forum. I lead an international employment working group, what we call internally, and here we have represented colleagues from tax, legal, people operations, so every topic that would touch in order to enable that request is discussed in the group to also collect consensus in terms of risk. What are the risk factors? Are there any mitigation factors? Is that going to set a precedence if we allow it? And we collectively discuss these cases before we actually give a resolution. And in the end, if there are risks that we must take, then this has to be signed off by the senior leadership.
Okay. Matthias, what is your approach in the company? How do you deal with the educational part internally towards the senior leadership?
Yeah. we want to be more mindful of for what reason do we actually create a new hub, and I think so many times what I've seen also in my time at Zalando was very much, I still remember we opened up a spot in Lisbon, Portugal, and the business case was literally you get cheap talent there and then you can build and grow this. And that backfired in certain areas, because there was also high competitiveness at the market at that time where other big companies came in and they literally paid twice or three times over the market, which then makes your job of getting cheap talent in a little bit more difficult. So long story short, I think with leadership, you need to strategically be aligned of why are we doing this, for what reason, what is the purpose behind it. And my advice is once you have that in sync, whatever that means for you, hire and focus on a local leader. If you don't have a local leader that drives this, and I'm here with Rob, I think we are not so far away. I do believe that leaders are the people who engage, who drive culture, productivity. Totally agree. But here it's really important that you have the right leader in that setup to make the success in the hub. And then it's also starting with expectation management. Like a lot of people think, so for example, take Poland, you can, I think, do this within 2 weeks or so to get a legal entity set up. It's not a big deal because there's so much services and so on. But it's really then about if you hire people then and you start doing this, when is the return on investment happening? And a lot of people believe this is happening in 3 to 6 months. That's never going to happen. It's probably going to be 12 to 18 months until this hub is really bringing return to whatever goal you had. And you need to be patient here. I think we are so much in the illusion of, oh, we can do this now, we can be so flexible, we can become a global company within no time. But then they wonder why people are not productive, why people are not onboarded well, why people are not efficient, right? And it's because it takes time to everyone who has been in a hub with a headquarter. These are satellites, right? And they create their own living, their own culture. The sync with the headquarter is a challenge. So I think, these are parts of the experiences and education that needs to happen with executives to understand when do we expect what, for what reason, how do we do this, how do we set this up. And I could not stress this enough is, of course, the expertise that you need to have in this country from a labor law perspective, from what kind of, is it full-time employees, is it B2B contracts in Poland, and so on, right? So there are so many market specifics, so you need to do your due diligence.
Yeah, that brings me actually to the next question. And I don't work in global mobility for 15 years, like some experts here in the room. But for me already, it feels like regulations are changing very, very fast. Almost every month, something new is coming or changing. And Jaya, you have a lot of experience in the industry. And I would particularly be interested to know your perspective on this, if it's really running as fast as my perspective is, or is it just a biased position that made us feel this way, or it has always been like this?
Yeah, well, thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yes, no, it's a good question, of course, and it's something that I think most of the mobility professionals here in the room would agree. We're constantly dealing with constant changing regulations. We always need to keep our eyes and ears out. I think it's great now with AI, online, everything that comes into your feed. Also, when you're online looking or searching for certain information, that you receive this information now, where there is a change or there is a forum being organized to educate all the mobility professionals about this changes come about. You might want to look into your organization if this affects you. And it's something I've seen throughout, so it's not a myth. It's not a myth. I mean, of course, the whole mobility landscape has shifted and changed over the last so many years. I think if you look back, there were only traditional assignments at one point in time, and that has shifted a great deal. I think it has gone all the way to localization, saying, okay, now the skill really likes to move everywhere, let's localize people. But then again, if they're staying on with the company and there are other internal moving opportunities, how do you move them? But that's one thing about the shifting space, and similarly the regulatory space is also adjusting to how these actually move, because if you see now workations, then there's also a lot of shift. We did see the teleworker change, and this was another one to say, okay, now because social security wise it was only 25% before, and now for certain countries joined it, certain did not, and then the company needs to look inside in their operations. Well, how does this affect us? Is it something that benefits us? Is it something that we want to adapt? And similarly, if you have if you are a very global organization, I mean, of course, right now I work at Zalando, we're not a very, very big organization, but I've worked in my past with very big organizations where we had a team. Of course, our providers were very effective in a way to keep us informed about these are the changes. You have X number of expats or assignees in certain countries, or maybe we have a plan on the horizon where it's being discussed with the providers and how those changes will affect, whether that's a tax efficiency, whether that's an immigration reform change. And time and again, we see every country goes through these changes, right? Because in the end, the government uses immigration and taxation as a tool to manage, whether that's labor shortage, whether that's optimizing certain taxation policies within the country, and we just have to adapt and move with it.
Yeah, very interesting what you mentioned, and that brings me a little bit to the outlook into 2025. And Julia, I'm very especially interested on your point of view on this this question. Will it become simpler or more complicated to strike the balance between offering global mobility to talent and how organizations can, be safe from potential breaches?
So the question is, will it get simpler?
Yeah. Will it become simpler or more complicated
I would
to
love
offer a global mobility?
Yeah, I would love to say it's gonna get simpler, but to be honest, I don't really think it's gonna be the case. I'm not that deep into whatever discussions are going on EU level and so on, but I feel like they've been going on for quite a long time, and I don't see a lot of news about that right now. So at least there, I think on regulation side, it will probably stay the same, but maybe even get worse, because countries are now understanding that they have a new form of kind of income if people are going there, nomads are living there, and obviously, and I think it's only fair that they receive their share, and then people are also compliant with the local laws there. So I think it might even get more tricky on this side. But I feel like there are also so many great solutions out there who have thought about how to streamline these processes to assist global mobility experts, or to even take out the whole complex work on that side.
Okay, thank you very much. Looking at the time, we made it on point. I would love to invite you for a quick Q&A. Do we have one or two questions, Vasi? Do we have time for it? If there are two questions, maybe? Okay.
You all kind of introduced what you're doing in the work from anywhere, policy, framework, whatever. Have you ever dealt with a case going astray, have you had to enforce consequences for misused policy, or somebody forgot to say where they are and you find out that they are elsewhere, not in their place of work? Did you have to enforce any consequences, or did you have to deal with anything like that?
One this week, if it's... we had someone who, has been working with their camera off, and their manager said their Slack time zone is it's like America, East Coast or something like that, and they just weren't being transparent with where they were. And so, what do you do in that kind of situation? So you're contracted to work in the UK, when we need you to return to the UK, you haven't been transparent with us. You need to return in X number of weeks or whatever it is, and and if not, we may need to do something about it. But that's kind of how it is. It's not a regular occurrence, but just I thought the timing was good. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing so honestly. And I think we stick it to the one question because I see everyone needs a coffee. Everyone needs the bathroom. So feel free to engage with our amazing speakers during the coffee. And I hope you enjoyed it. And a big applause to all of you.